The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 24th chapter. Jesus himself stood among the disciples and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you frightened, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see. For a ghost doesn't have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And when he had done this, he showed them his hands and his feet. Now, while in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, and he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Then he said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the Scriptures. And he said to them, "Thus it is written that the Messiah is to suffer and to rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed in his name to all the nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things." This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. Just like last week, we're going to start off with a cartoon strip. It is one of my favorites. I got a lot of favorite cartoons. This actually is one of Peter and my favorite cartoon strips. The cartoon starts off, this is Zitz is the name of the cartoon strip. "How long till dinner?" About 30 seconds. Waits for a moment. "You mind if I make myself a snack while I'm waiting?" I love that. "How long till dinner?" 30 seconds. "I can't wait that long. I must eat now." Bring that up because the gospel lesson has Jesus eating again. Jesus, it shouldn't surprise us because so many times when Jesus is there and in the scene, he's eating. He's eating all the time and with all kinds of people. We find him eating. Meals seem to be important for Jesus. It reminds me of a story where there's a young boy, maybe 5 years old, and he's with his family, and that they're at one of the local diners, and the wait staff, they come over to take the order, take the dinner, and the waitress gets to the boy and says, "So what would you like to eat?" He says, "I want a hot dog." And the mom says, "No, he won't have a hot dog. He'll have the meatloaf." She turns to him and says, "Would you like ketchup and mustard on your hot dog?" "Yeah." What would you like to drink?" "I want a Coke." And the mom says, No, he'll have a milk. He'll have milk to drink." And the waitress turns and goes, "Would you like a straw with your Coke?" "Yeah." And the waitress turns and goes away, and the young boy looks at his parents and says, "See, she thinks I'm real." There's something about meals. There's something about eating together. There's something about being in the midst of one another and breaking bread and being there that seems to make us real. There should be no surprise that in the text today, Jesus asks, "Do you have something to eat?" In that, there's something real. From the beginning of the time that I was ordained as a pastor and started this pastor gig, as we say. Years ago, Bethany Lutheran, like every other congregation, there was a basement and there was a kitchen, not like our kitchen here at Zion. This was a tiny, tiny, tiny kitchen. And at the end of the kitchen, there was a refrigerator, and as we would gather for different events, we would find ourselves in the basement. And when we would do youth group with the small core group, we would get down and we would walk down the basement, and it without fail would happen that one of the high school boys would walk down, would open up the refrigerator and say the words, "Do you have anything to eat?" Eating together makes us real. There's a crucial aspect of finding time as we eat together. Now, when we would gather as the youth group and we would find ourselves around, whether it be a table or we were sitting outside and we were eating and we were having conversations, not only would the conversation of food come up, but there were many times that another type of conversation would come up, and that would have to do with our markings on our skin, or otherwise known as scars. When you gather and you're eating around a picnic table and you've got shorts on, kids start to notice, "Oh, you've got a scar on your knee as well. How did you get that one?" I have a scar on my left knee that kids go, "What happened there?" Peter now, is your scar on the left knee or on the right? I forget. It's the left knee too. It's like we're related. And there's a story about that. In the gospel lesson, not only is Jesus found eating with the disciples, but again, there's the story about scars. "Look at my scars," Jesus says. "Look at my hands, look at my side. See that I am real." We gather together and we tell stories. We tell stories about our lives, about how ways that we connect with one another around a meal and around common experience. "Oh, how did you get that?" Or when someone has a pierced nose, "Did that hurt?" All kinds of conversation about scars and markings and food. Because it's about being real. It's about relating to one another. We connect with one another through meal and through our scars and our wounds. We, as a church, when we come together, when we worship, we partake in a meal that is about common story, and it is connected together with scars and story. "This is my body broken for you. This is my blood shed for you. This is bread and wine given for you." Now, it used to be that communion was seen as something that you did not come up for unless you were worthy. If you didn't have confession the night before, that you didn't talk to the pastor, that you didn't show that you were okay to receive this meal, then you weren't allowed to come and partake. That this meal was seen as a sign of being okay or being right with God. And I don't know when the shift happened. Martin Luther started a lot of that, but it was still present, because people can remember. They go, "Oh yeah, I remember as a kid." That was it. So I don't remember where the shift happened, but by the time I was able to start taking communion, it had started to shift from that. But this meal became less about, I'm going to show how I am worthy to receive this meal, and more about common experience and the God of ours that calls us to this meal and that says, it's not you being worthy to come and take this meal, it's that this meal and the grace that God offers us makes us worthy. What I love in this text, in the gospel lesson, is that as Jesus appears in and around the disciples, when Jesus appears and he says, "Do you have anything to eat?" and he shares a meal with the disciples, it's the same disciples that the text describes as disbelieving, yet feeling joyful. Having doubts, yet being able to touch the risen Christ. That these disciples that are gathered around this meal are like you and me, that come to this place with common experience and common stories and common scars and wounds, and yet are invited to this meal where Christ says, "You are welcome as you are. Come and receive this bread and receive this wine. Come and partake in this meal that's all about the risen Christ calling us and moving us into the world." And as we are called, and as we share this meal, we do so as community. Christ says, "When two or more are gathered, I will be present." When we break bread and we share wine, Christ is present here because we do so as a community. You know, it is interesting that throughout different denominations, no matter what our view about communion is, whether communion is just a remembering of the meal, or communion as we believe Christ is present in, with, and under the bread, or whether you are Catholic and you view that this bread and wine physically changes to Christ's body. Those three major differences, the one thing that we all have in common is that communion doesn't happen alone. That when we come and we take bread and wine, we do so as a community. That we are called together in a common story, in a common Christ, through the resurrected Christ, calling us to take this bread and this wine, this meal that is connected with scar stories and meal. And that this God of ours then sends us out into the world to be Christ for the world. So when you come today and you receive bread and wine, know that it is Christ that makes you worthy. That if in your heart you're going, why or how can I take this meal? I say to you, how can you not take this meal? Because in here is strength for the journey. It is God that claims you and then God that sends you into the world. Do you have anything to eat? Yes, we do. Come. Amen.